Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 15 of the Bible as History with none other than your host, the Judith. I'm so glad you joined me. And if you haven't already figured it out, this episode might have something to do with the flood. Yes, behind me, you see an ark, and you are looking at the Ark Encounter in Kentucky. My husband and I got to go one year, and let me tell you, you need to see it, folks. It will change your perspective of the ark. It is amazing. It's massive. It is worth the visit. And yes, that's me. My husband took this picture. I didn't want to deal with copyright, so we used one of our own. So on that note, let's get right in this because I have got a lot to cover for you folks in this episode, and it's going to be a little bit longer than normal, but I'm going to try to get through it as quick as I can. So the Great Flood is often a subject of controversy depending on who you talk to. Some do believe it's a myth or a fable or just a bedtime story or a cute picture in a nursery at a church. But I'm not one of those people. And I stumbled upon something that really intrigued me. And I started digging and dug and got to an answer. And I can't wait to share it with y'all. So let me read a little bit and give you some backstory of the flood from the Bible's perspective. And I encourage you to read Genesis chapter 7 and 8 on your own, but I'm going to be recapping a couple verses and then reading a couple verses from Genesis chapter 7. So first of all, when you think about the flood, in conversations that I've had, and even before my walk got deeper with the Lord, you think about, oh, it just rained for 40 days and 40 nights, which is in verse 12 of chapter 7. And you just think of like a flood when it rains a lot and it floods. No. So verse 11 says, the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. So what the Bible is saying here is the fountains were thrown up through the ground. You can look at a Google map, any of the maps online, and you see the rifts in the ocean. That's from the flood where the floodwaters came up. You can look at mountain ranges like the Tetons, and they look like at one point they may have been flat and something shoved them up. That's from the flood. And then the windows of heaven were opened. It's believed and it's biblical that there was a vapor canopy over the pre-flood world, which made that climate so different from our climate, and that it had never rained before. And this is in God's word. It's in Genesis. And so when the flood happened, here you have water coming up from the bottom and this catastrophic, violent activity with the land masses on earth. And then you have this canopy that just explodes. And this water is coming for 40 days and 40 nights. So this was a catastrophic event. So it goes on to tell us in verse 19 of chapter 7 that the waters rose 15 cubits above the mountaintops. So, okay, great, Judith. What's a cubit? Some people may know, some people may not. Basically, it's an ancient way that they measured, and you see it often in the Bible, and it's from the elbow to the tip of the fingers. It's generally about 1.5 feet. So 15 cubits, according to the New Living Translation and a footnote they have on this verse, the waters rose about 23 feet or 6.8 meters above the highest mountains during the flood. Whew, that's a lot of water. So verses 22 through 23 are the ones that I want to read, and I'm reading from the New Living Translation. And it says, all the living things on earth died: birds, domestic animals, wild animals, small animals that scurry along the ground, and all the people. Everything that breathed and lived on dry land died. God wiped out every living thing on earth: people, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and the birds of the sky. All were destroyed. The only people who survived were Noah and those with him in the boat. Wow. So what do the fossils tell us? We all have heard about this fossil and that fossil, and it's from this era and that era, and everybody has a theory about it, but I'm going to tell you and go down this rabbit trail with you of what I uncovered. So first of all, I did know about the Paluxy River Basin in Glen Rose, Texas. It is the location of the Dinosaur Valley State Park, where it is believed that that human footprints and dinosaur footprints are found there. And they have found, and there is a museum that made a cast of it and has done 3D scans to validate that this is legit, this is not fake. They found a human footprint, and on top of it, tripedal dinosaur footprint. So the human stepped and moved on, and then the dinosaur stepped and moved on. So it ends up like this. Amazing. So that is a very controversial find. I've watched several documentaries on it, right, in Texas. And so that one I knew about. But this one, this just showed up on my Facebook feed, as things do. And you can't trust everything you read on Facebook. And, I pray you have discernment and wisdom and, take things to heart. And, but this jumped out at me. So there was a museum called the Northwest Science Museum, and they shared a post that I really found compelling. And before I share the post, I do want to say, did a little digging on this place. They were in Nampa, Idaho. They are no longer operational, but they are still sharing different things that they find on their Facebook page. And in their intro, they describe their work as, "We want to present the compelling, censored science other museums do not show, so that people can draw their own conclusions about the origins of life." So on that, I'll share the post, some of the post. The Ashley Phosphate beds, an evolutionist's worst nightmare and proof of Noah's flood. One of the most fascinating fossil graveyards ever discovered is located in South Carolina. The Ashley Beds is an enormous phosphate graveyard that contains mixed remains of man with land and sea animals, notably dinosaurs, plesiosaurs, Hadrosaurus, Ichthyosaurus, whales, sharks, rhinos, horses, mastodons, mammoths, porpoises, elephants, deer, pigs, dogs, and sheep. None of these animals and creatures should have existed together if the theory of evolution is true. This treasure trove of fossils from the phosphate beds was given in the records of Major Edward Willis, who displayed them at multiple expositions. And it cites a reference for this from 1881. Professor F.S. Holmes, who was a paleontologist and curator of the College of Charleston's Natural History Museum, described the fossil graveyard in a report to the Academy of Natural Sciences. And he says, "Remains of the hog, the horse, and other animals of recent date, together with human bones mingled with the bones of the mastodon and extinct gigantic lizards or dinosaurs." Wow. So this post, it says some more things, but it got my attention because I've heard, "Oh, you never see dinosaur bones and human bones and blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, okay, I want to know more about this. And so I started digging. And the first thing I want to point out is, when you look at this from the perspective of an evolutionist, this finding would mean that creatures from the Cretaceous to the Holocene period are mixed together in this graveyard. The plesiosaurus supposedly lived in the sea over 200 million years ago, and Hadrosaurus lived on land 75 million years ago, so there's a gap. Ichthyosaurus lived in the sea over 150 million years ago. So these sea and land dinosaurs should not have been in an Ashley Phosphate bed, fossil bed together. And they definitely should not have existed with man, horses, dogs, and sheep. So this throws evolution upside down if this is legit. So I really wanted to know, could this be true? And I also apologize because I'm not sure I pronounced the dinosaur names correctly, and it's not my area of expertise. And some of these words are long and scientific. Just be patient and bear with me and just listen to what I found. So while I believe the Bible's true and the flood happened, I wanted to have something tangible to share in these podcasts with you guys to validate that, hey, look what's been found way back in the 1800s and it's maybe been suppressed. So I started digging, and I started with the source from the Facebook post and could not find it. I could find a reference to it, but I could not find what it actually said. So then I ran across something that Holmes had written about the Ashley Phosphate findings in the American Journal of Science and Arts, specifically volume 3 in 1849, page 197. And when I dug, this is a journal that's still in existence that has all of their archives online, and I could find every single volume except volume 3 from 1849. So at this point, I'm thinking, yeah, this is being suppressed. So as I did a little more digging, I thought, well, maybe I can learn something about this Mr. Holmes. And so I did. I discovered his name is Francis S. Holmes. He was a professor of paleontology and curator of the Natural History Museum, which is now the Charleston Museum, located at the college from 1850 to 1869. So I'm like, okay, so that guy's legit, but what about the human bones? Still can't find anything. I did find another reference for another man named Dr. N.A. Pratt, who was a chemist. And he also supposedly found human bones in the same place where Holmes found them. And later found out that Holmes and Pratt started the Charleston Mining and Manufacturing Company to mine the phosphate lime for fertilizer. And if you've been to Charleston, we used to live there, so I'm familiar with Ashley Phosphate Road. This is where it gets its name. So there's a little fun fact for you. So I'm digging and digging, and I could find sources and I could find articles about their findings, but it was always about the phosphate beds and the stones and the limestone and some of the dinosaur bones, but nothing to verify that the human bones had been found. And I'm like, okay, so they publish what they want, but not all of it, or it's not legit, because I want to do due diligence. You know, I know in the professional world, as a degreed professional, when you do a thesis, you have to cite references. You know, you have to cite scientific, academic, peer-reviewed references. And that was what I was trying to find, especially when they're listed. I'm finding names of articles and they're just not there on the internet. So weird. So at this point, I found at least 5 academically sourced, peer-reviewed articles, but I can't find them. I can find it by name on the internet, but I can't look up, you know, I can't see a PDF or I can't see what they say. It was just really bizarre. But the very next one I could, or the previous one I could. And so I was about to say, all right, I'm literally going to have to just take a trip to Charleston, see some of our old friends while we're there, and go visit the College of Charleston and bring my list of resources and say, I would like to see these, please. And then I stumbled on a YouTube video. And in that video, this gentleman talked about a book that Holmes had written called Phosphate Rocks of South Carolina in 1870 by Francis S. Holmes. Now, I do need to add that in the professional world, when you're studying for a degree or you're doing a thesis or whatever, I would not have been allowed to use this as a reference because this guy self-published this book. So that's huge. So I'm like, at this point, I'm kind of skeptic that, well, he's a paleontologist and he believes that this happened in this era and that era and blah, 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 blah. and this is the time that Darwinism and the theory of evolution is really starting to get thick and strong in the scientific community. So I'm like, I'm probably not going to find anything. It's just going to be all about the phosphate beds and what they did and how they built their company. And so I get the book and I read it, I thumb through it and I'm looking for something that might jump out at me. And I come across this on page 60. So they're talking about what they find in the Ashley phosphate beds. And they're all of a sudden they found stone arrowheads and a stone hatchet, which they're like, this shouldn't be there. So then on the next page, here in the same phosphate bed area, they find bones and teeth of the mastodon, elephant, rhinoceros, horse, and other land animals belong, and which are found associated with them in the same matrix of mother bed of clay, which is of the post-Pliocene period, and which we have since designated as prehistoric age of man. So in English, they're saying that what they found matches, the era that it should be in based on what their theories are. And then this professor to me, who was there, said, don't say anything, don't publish about the arrowheads and the stone hatchet. And quote, he says, it was possible for them to have fallen into a hole at the foot of the tree or the burrow of some animal. Okay, let's back up here. So let's talk about a couple floods in our day. Mount St. Helen, all right? That eruption caused a flood that completely not only decimated the part where it was erupted, but created a new canyon very quickly from the water. And then even closer to this date that I'm teaching this, we have Hurricane Helene in North Carolina, in Tennessee, parts of Georgia, that whole pocket, that water was a lot of water, fast, massive, went in, rearranged things, wiped things out. In both cases, you have a huge amount of sediment. You can look at the pictures of Asheville, North Carolina, and you can see the sediment. Even I've been through a flood. We went through the flood in Nashville. And, the 500-year flood, so they said, and I remember all the sediment when the water receded. So you're going to tell me, when you've already said in this book that this is created from some period where there was a lot of water, and we're looking at limestone, which is created from a bunch of bones, that these artifacts just fell into a hole or a burrow, or I'm not buying it. So at this point, I'm really getting skeptical, and I'm not thinking I'm going to find anything. I'm thinking they're going to dismiss it as a fluke. Well, y'all, buckle up, because this is getting good. So I wish you could see it, but it says human bones discovered. Let me read it for you on page 62 to the top of page 63. Not very long after finding the above named relics of human workmanship, and while engaged in our usual visits to the Ashley bed, a bone was found projecting from the bluff immediately in contact with the surface of the stony stratum, or the phosphate rocks. We pulled it out, and behold, a human bone. Without hesitation, it was condemned as an accidental occupant of quarters to which it had no right geologically. And so we threw it into the river. Alas, we have lived to regret our timidity and rashness. A year after, a lower jawbone with teeth was taken from the same bed, and we now have it in the cabinet. Subsequent events and discoveries show conclusively that the first discovered human bone was in place, and that the beds of the post-Pliocene, not only on the Ashley, but in France, Switzerland, and other European countries, contain human bones associated with the remains of extinct animals and relics of human workmanship, proving most conclusively that the Carolina specimens were found in place, And as the European discoveries were made in 1854 and ours in 1844, to South Carolina should be awarded the honor of the first discovery and determination of the paleontological age of the post-Pliocene beds. It stamps it as the prehistoric age of man, the connecting link between the tertiary and the recent age, the true quaternary period in its geological history. So in a nutshell, what he is saying is these artifacts, these bones, all came from the same period. And so, boom, here you go. You've got human bones discovered with animals and dinosaurs. Amazing, just amazing. And why has this been suppressed? Well, I mean, that's rhetorical. But 1844, and in my research, I found some things, it was really hard to get something concrete for them that went back as far as the 1500s, that they have found bones and dinosaur bones and things that they couldn't explain, that they were trying to grasp. What is this? Amazing, just amazing. So furthermore, in this book, Pratt brings a rock that he finds in Europe, in London, in England, that reminded him of the stuff. It's a limestone phosphate rock, reminded him of the limestone phosphate rocks from the Ashley Phosphate beds. So he brings it back and asks Holmes and his team to take a look at it, to which they do. And they determine, and I quote, which is on page 67 of this same book, in 1849, Holmes says, Charleston was located geologically on the same formation as that of the great city of London. Wow. So it sounds to me like it's a really big sediment, just like the little floods that I mentioned, that compared to the global flood, I mean, they weren't little floods at all. They were catastrophic, and people have died and lost everything in Hurricane Helene and Mount St. Helens. But the global flood of Noah's day reshaped continents and left layers of sediment that span continents. And back in 1849, we have a documentation of it. Just amazing. You cannot make this stuff up. I also want to point out that the museum that was at the College of Charleston is part of the Greater Charleston Museum, which is, I believe, if not the oldest, one of the oldest museums in the United States. It's 250 years old. And all of that stuff that was at the College of Charleston left in 1914 and went to the big Charleston Museum. I've been to that museum several times, and I have never seen these bones. Maybe I just missed the exhibit. I kind of doubt it, because I'm a history nerd. So where are they? And what else is out there that's been suppressed? So as always, I have links down in the bottom for you, and that's my takeaway. What else might surface that was suppressed that validates the flood? This is such a unique finding and so cool. And maybe one day I can get my hands on the peer-reviewed information, but I'm happy with this book, because this guy put his reputation on the line up against his peers who were evolutionists and paleontologists in this era and that era and that era, which is not what the Bible says. And, he said, wait a minute, we should be recognized as the first people who found this. South Carolina should. And it's a shame that they missed out on that opportunity, but it is what it is. So I hope that this has been enlightening for you. And, I got 2 incidents that I shared with you where we do have dinosaurs and humans together. And this is just an amazing finding. I'm so glad that I was able to get the book, because I wouldn't have shared it otherwise until I could have had something concrete to say, yes, somebody from history wrote this down. So on that note, remember, I love you, Jesus loves you, and I hope you have a wonderful, productive, awesome, and peaceful week. So have a good one, everybody. Shalom.